I made the call to 911 in a state of panic. The voice on the other end of the line, however, didn't sound like a police officer. Instead, it was a cheerful male voice that greeted me. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling with fear. "Is this emergency services?" "It sure is," the cheerful voice replied. "What's the trouble, young man?" I frowned. "Young man?" I thought to myself. Shouldn't they be asking 911, "What's your emergency?" Something felt off, but I dismissed it, assuming it might be the person's first day on the job. Little did I know the horrifying truth of who I was actually talking to. Nevertheless, there was no time to waste. "Something's wrong with my mom," I explained urgently. She fell down all of a sudden. I held the phone to my ear and stepped back, my eyes fixed on my mother's motionless form on the ground. The rise and fall of her chest confirmed that she was still alive. "Oh no, that's too bad." The person on the other end responded casually. "Someone will be over right away." Click. I dropped the phone and cautiously approached my mother. The realization hit me. I hadn't provided them with our address. How could they not have asked for it? Panic surged through me as I sprinted back to the phone and dialed 911 again. 151 Cliffmore Way. 151 Cliffmore Way. I shouted into the receiver before hanging up. I closed my eyes tightly, a mix of frustration and fear overwhelming me. I wanted to scream, to release the emotions building inside me, but I had to stay strong. I had to be there for my mother. The wait felt like an eternity, but finally, the doorbell rang. I rushed to my feet, filled with both relief and anticipation. However, as I turned the corner, my excitement turned to confusion and alarm. A short, brown-haired man with a white complexion was peering through the window, a grin on his face. He rang the bell again, more insistently this time. I noticed he was wearing a red nurse's uniform, which initially brought me some relief. The ambulance people were here. I let out a sigh of relief, believing that everything was going to be okay. Little did I know the true intentions of the man standing at our door. I yanked the door open. "Hello there, young man," the smiling man exclaimed. I read the name Marbus on his name tag, right beside the pens and stethoscope. "Where's the unlucky lady?" he asked. "You mean my mom?" I stammered. "She's in here." Two expressionless assistants in identical red uniforms rolled a Guernsey to where my mother lay, surrounded by shards of glittering glass. Up, and away. Nurse Marbus rubbed his hands together excitedly, while my mother was loaded into the Guernsey and rolled out the door. A jolt of helpless fear shot through me. They were taking my mother away. "Mister, can I ride with my mom to the hospital?" I asked the smiling man. Hospital? Nurse Marbus wrinkled his forehead confused. "Oh, there's no need for that. We're professionals, you see." As the assistants loaded my mother into the back of the black ambulance, I looked over their shoulders, at the sharp and jagged tools hanging from its walls. They weren't like any medical instruments that I'd ever seen. "We'll take excellent care of your mother," the smiling man went on, "and call as soon as you can see her." Nurse Marbus slept into the rear compartment. His expressionless assistants climbed into the cab, and the black ambulance began to back out of the driveway. I ran behind it waving my hands. I wanted to yell at them to stop, but I was just a kid. Who was I to contradict the professionals? I was still standing there 5 minutes later when flashing red and blue lights came skidding around the street corner. The two police officers muttered into the radios and looked worriedly at the scene. In front of them, a crying child, a wide open door. "Did you call 911? a blonde policewoman asked. I did. I nodded. "But they already came. They took my mom away?" The two police officers looked at each other. "I'm afraid that's not possible. We received a call from this location." A child shouting in address, and were the first ones to respond. The words spun around in my head. If they were the first ones here who had taken my mom, no, I whispered, my heart racing. Then who was before I could finish? The policewoman pulled up a radio again. "We need an immediate trace on a black ambulance that just left 151 Cliffmore Way. Suspects are potentially dangerous." The other officer crouched down to my level, his eyes searching mine. "Can you describe the man who came to your door?" he asked. "Then Nurse Marbus," I murmured, remembering the name tag. "He wore a red uniform and he had two assistants. Their van was full of weird tools." The officers' faces turned ashen as they exchanged a fearful glance. Nurse Marbus, the policewoman, repeated into her radio, her voice cracking. She began to frantically search her records on a small device, her hands shaking. The male officer continued to speak with me, but his eyes were wide with shock. They worked in panicked coordination, reaching out to other units and checking databases. Finally, the policewoman looked up to her partner, her face white as a sheet. Her voice was trembling as she started talking. "The name Marbus. belongs to a man who used to work for the city's medical services, but he died in a terrible accident over 20 years ago. The details were horrifying, and it was said that he had been conducting some unlicensed experiments. My heart pounded in my ears as I processed her words. Dead, what's going to happen to my mom? I asked, tears welling in my eyes. I just want her back. We're going to do everything we can to find her, the male officer assured me, but I could see the fear in his eyes. A full year went by since the officer unconfidently muttered those words to me. Exactly 5 full years since my mother went missing. That was when I first received a phone call. I first heard the ringing on my landline and ran over to it to hear a deep male voice. Hello, young man, everything is going just fine. She sends her love. That was all he said before ending the call. At least that evil man had the decency to check up on me. I told the police, I told my family. I did everything I possibly could to somehow locate this number back to my mother, but there was nothing that could be done. The police spent weeks trying to locate where the call came from, but they couldn't. I had to do something myself. Feeling helpless and desperate, I eventually turned to hiring a private investigator, hoping that someone outside the conventional system might have more success. The investigator I hired was a middle-aged man named Leonard, who had a reputation for being able to find people when no one else could.